The best parts of your story are still unwritten, waiting for the right moment to be revealed to the world. Join us as we explore the infinite possibilities of the future and the power of starting over. Subscribe now, and let's write the next big chapter together. I left my reading glasses at the pharmacy counter on a Tuesday afternoon in October, which is how I found out my daughter had been trying to erase me. It sounds small when I say it that way. Forgotten glasses. A Tuesday. But the things that change your life rarely announce themselves. They slip into the back door while you're looking somewhere else. I'm 64 years old. For 31 of those years, I ran Callaway Fine Watches on the corner of Merchant Street in Asheville, North Carolina. My father started it in 1967 with 2 display cases and a German workbench he'd shipped over from Stuttgart. I grew up listening to the sound of small gears turning, learned to tell time before I learned to read. When he passed it to me, I swore I'd keep every gear, every case, every tradition intact. I did. I built it into something worth $14 million on a slow day, twice that on a good one. Repairs, restorations, estate pieces, custom commissions. 3 generations of Asheville families came to us when something mattered. My wife Margaret used to sit in the back room on Saturdays and read while I worked. She said the ticking of all those clocks was the most peaceful sound she'd ever heard. She passed 6 years ago. Breast cancer, gone in 8 months. After that, the ticking started sounding different to me. Lonelier. My daughter Renata was 39. She'd worked at the shop since she was 16. First sweeping floors, then learning the cases, then handling the estate acquisitions I taught her myself. Her husband, Derek Holt, was a commercial real estate developer, good-looking in the way of men who know it, always with an opinion about the watch business, despite knowing nothing about horology. He smiled too easily and listened too carefully, the way people do when they're calculating. For about 8 months before that Tuesday, I'd been having trouble, forgetting appointments I'd written down, fumbling with clasps I'd handled 10,000 times, losing the thread of conversations mid-sentence. I'd driven to the Ingalls grocery on Reynolds Road 3 times in 1 week, each time forgetting I'd already been. My doctor said it was stress, grief still, possibly early cognitive decline. He adjusted my blood pressure medication, recommended I rest more, recommended I consider stepping back from the business. I didn't want to step back. The shop was what I had left. Renata came to me in August with the papers: power of attorney, financial management authorization, operational control of Callaway Fine Watches, pending my former review by a neurologist she had already scheduled. Derek stood behind her with his arms folded and his face arranged into something he probably practiced in the mirror, concerned with a thin coating of patience. "Dad," she said, "you left the shop safe open on a Thursday night. You forgot the Hartwell appointment twice. You called me by Mom's name last week. I had no memory of leaving the safe open. I had no defense against the Hartwell appointments. And I had called her Margaret once, in the kitchen, reaching for something. And the name just came out wrong. Grief did that. I told her I'd think about it. She nodded and folded the papers back into her portfolio with the same careful hands I'd taught her to use on antique dials. That was 2 weeks before the Tuesday I left my glasses. I went back to pick them up late in the afternoon, just before the pharmacy closed. Claire Wooten was the pharmacist on duty. She'd been filling my prescriptions for 11 years. I'd repaired her grandmother's Elgin pocket watch as a gift for her mother's birthday, and she cried when she picked it up. We had that kind of relationship, the kind you build slowly in a small city, where the same people keep finding each other. She handed me the glasses, and then she paused in the way people pause when they're deciding whether to say something they rehearsed. "Mr. Callaway," she said, "can I ask you to come around the counter?" Her voice was careful. Not scared, but close. She led me into the small consultation room they used for vaccine appointments. She closed the door. She set a printed document on the table between us and smoothed it with her palm before she looked up. "I want to show you something," she said. I flagged it twice and tried to talk myself out of saying anything, but I can't. She turned the paper toward me. It was a prescription fill history, my name. The medication listed was correct, metoprolol for blood pressure, same as always, but the dosage had been adjusted 3 months ago, not by my doctor. The adjustment had come in on a fax prescription from a physician I'd never heard of at a practice in Charlotte. "Mr. Callaway," Claire said. Your regular dose is 25 milligrams. What you've been filling here for the past 3 months is 100. Quadruple. Someone called it in, and I filled it without catching the discrepancy. That's on me. I'm so sorry. I stared at the paper. She slid a second sheet across. I looked it up when I found the original, she said. Mydaughter-in-law at that dose, in someone your age, with your baseline, it causes cognitive symptoms. Confusion, memory gaps, fatigue. It mimics early dementia. If a doctor saw you on the medication without knowing about the overdose, they would diagnose cognitive decline. My hand was on the table. I watched it very carefully and made sure it didn't shake. Because Benjamin had been poisoning me in the video I'd just spent a year not being in, because this was my life and not a story, and because the person who picked up my prescriptions every month for 3 months was my daughter Renata, the paper in front of me meant something I didn't want it to mean. Who called it in? I asked. She hesitated. The fax came from a Charlotte number. The physician name on the script is Dr. Marcus Webb. I looked him up. He's real. He's in internal medicine. But there's no referral, no record of you as a patient, no reason your file would be in Charlotte. I asked if she still had the fax. She did. I asked her not to fill any more prescriptions under my name without calling me directly, cell phone only, regardless of what the record said. She nodded. She looked like she was going to cry, and I told her she'd done the right thing, and I meant it. She had done the right thing. She had done the only thing that mattered. The drive home took 12 minutes. I spent 10 of them thinking about my daughter's hands folding those power of attorney papers, the care she used, the patience, the precision. I had taught her that precision. I stopped the correct dose of metoprolol that night. I started researching what it would take to flush the elevated levels from my system. I slept 4 hours and woke up clear-headed in a way I hadn't been since spring. And I started making a list. My father's workbench was still in the back of the shop. I used it that Wednesday night after closing, alone with the locked door and the fluorescent light above the German vise. The bench had a drawer I'd never shown Renata, a false bottom my father built in 1971, when he didn't trust the bank. It held nothing valuable anymore. I used it to hold what I was building. I went through 3 months of bank statements first. Callaway Fine Watches had a business account and an estate acquisition fund, the latter holding about $2.3 million in liquid capital, reserved for when a collection came available. The estate fund showed 3 transfers I hadn't authorized, $40,000 and $65,000 and $40,000. It's $65,000, again, all marked in the notes field as vendor advance restoration supplies. We hadn't run a major restoration job in 6 months. The transfers had been initiated with my credentials, but from a device I didn't own, on days when I had been in the shop and wouldn't have been at a computer. I knew this because I kept a handwritten log in the bench drawer, the old way, the way my father kept records. I'd written down every restoration consultation, every estate call, every appointment since 1993. December 4th, the first transfer. I had been at the shop until 6:15, then home. December 19th, the second. A Tuesday, I'd been at a client consultation at the Biltmore Estate Liaison Office from 2 to 5. January 8th, the third, I'd been at the hospital for a routine cardiac follow-up all morning. On each of those days, Renata had been in the shop without me. I sat at my father's bench for a long time. The clocks ticked. Some of them were 200 years old, built by men whose hands had turned to dust before my grandfather was born. They'd kept time through things worse than this. They'd keep time after. I thought about Margaret, her last good day, the week before the morphine, sitting up in the hospital bed and asking me to describe the shop. "Tell me about the Breguet we took in from the Lowry estate," she said, and I described it to her for an hour. She closed her eyes and smiled, and I understood that the shop was both of ours, in a way that had nothing to do with the deed. Renata knew that. She'd been there that afternoon. She'd held her mother's hand. I put that thought in a drawer and walked it. The next morning, I called Thomas Briggs. Tom had been my attorney for 22 years. A quiet man from Weaverville who wore the same 3 suits on rotation and had never once been impressed by anything. I told him I needed an emergency appointment. No staff in the room, no record on the calendar. He said he'd be there in an hour. I told Tom everything: the prescription, the transfers, Claire's pharmacy records, my own log. Tom listened without writing anything down, which was how he listened when things were serious. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if Renata had mentioned a specific timeline for the power of attorney. She wanted it signed by the end of the month, I said. There's a meeting of the minority shareholders of the shop scheduled for November 15th. 3 partners from the original incorporation, who still hold small stakes. If I sign before that meeting, she can consolidate before they have standing to challenge anything. Tom looked at his hands. Derek Holt has a commercial development project, he said slowly. I read about it in the paper. Mixed use on the south side of town. He's been trying to get financing for 2 years. I nodded. The shop's building is on Merchant Street, Tom said. 3/4 of an acre in the middle of downtown Asheville, I said. Assessed at $4.1 million. Tom took a slow breath. Do you want to stop this, or do you want to end it? I want it to end, I said. We spent 3 hours planning. The plan had 4 parts. First, I needed to find Marcus Webb in Charlotte and understand his connection to Derek. Second, I needed to document the estate fund transfers in a form admissible in court. Third, I needed to protect the physical inventory of the shop. $3.2 million in watches and estate pieces, much of it irreplaceable, before November 15th. Fourth, I needed to give Renata every reason to believe I was still failing. The last part was the easiest. I'd been watching myself fail for months. I knew the performance by heart. That Thursday, when Renata stopped by the shop at noon, I left a display case unlocked while she watched. I squinted at a ticket I could read perfectly and asked her what it said. When she corrected me about the Hartwell account balance, I nodded and wrote the wrong number down again. She put her hand on my shoulder. Dad, come on, let's just get the papers done this week. Before the meeting. I want to do it at the meeting, I said. I want Tom there. I want the partners there. It just feels right to have everyone witness it. After all this time. She paused. The pause lasted almost 2 seconds, too long. Okay, she said. That makes sense. Her hand was still on my shoulder. I felt it there. I thought about her at 16, learning to handle a pocket watch movement for the first time, her face absolutely still with concentration. I drove to Charlotte on Friday morning. Marcus Webb's practice was in the medical building off Providence Road. I didn't go in. I sat in a parking lot and waited. He came out at 12:40 for lunch, alone. I followed him to a sandwich shop 2 blocks down, then went inside and sat 3 tables away. He was ordinary. Mid-50s, tired-looking, the kind of doctor who'd been disappointed by something for a long time. He ate his lunch and looked at his phone and left. I took a photograph of his car and his plates. Tom ran them that afternoon. Marcus Webb had a malpractice judgment against him from 2019, $380,000, still partially unpaid. His practice was quietly struggling. He'd also, according to public property records, purchased a condo in the same Charlotte development where Derek Holt's firm had completed a project in 2021. They'd been in the same orbit. That was enough. Tom called an old colleague who did forensic accounting and asked him to run the estate fund transfers quietly. By Sunday night, we had a chain. The transfers had been routed through a vendor account that had been created 11 months ago in my name, but the routing information led to a holding account in an LLC registered in Delaware. The LLC's registered agent was a law firm in Charlotte. Tom was still pulling the thread when I told him we had enough. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I played the fading patriarch. I stopped taking the overdose medication and kept the real dose. My mind cleared further each day. I slept well. I could hold a conversation without losing the thread. I tasted my coffee in the morning, and it was bitter and real, and I was grateful for it. On Wednesday morning, I called Tom. Tell me the minority partners will be at the meeting. Franklin Gear and the Okoffer family will be there, he said. I've confirmed it. Tell them nothing yet, I said, but keep them in the room. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to the shop and went into the back. There's a storage annex behind the main workroom, access to a door that looks like a wall panel. My father built it. Renata knew about it. I'd shown her years ago, but she never needed to use it, and I doubted she'd thought about it recently. I called Victor Okafor on Wednesday evening. Victor was 67, former watch collector, one of the original silent partners from when my father expanded in 1988. He'd known me since I was 18. I told him only what he needed to know, that I needed to move the estate acquisition inventory and the 12 most significant consignment pieces to a secure location before Thursday night. I told him I'd explain everything at the meeting. I told him to trust me. There was a pause on the line. Victor said, "I've known you since you were still learning to wind a mainspring, Harold. You don't ask for things that don't matter." "I'll need your truck," I said. "I know where the key is," he said. We worked Thursday night from 10 until 2 in the morning. Victor and his son James, who was built like a cornerback and moved like one. We wrapped everything in the padded transit cases I'd bought for exactly this kind of transport. The irreplaceable pieces, a 1929 Patek Philippe reference 96, a collection of English fusee movements from the 1840s, 11 estate pieces from the Worthington family consignment that together appraised over $700,000. All of it into Victor's climate-controlled truck, driven to a bonded storage facility in Weaverville that Tom had arranged under a trust name. We replaced everything on the shelves and in the cases with the pieces I'd been planning to send to auction anyway. Good watches, real watches, but nothing that couldn't be replaced. From the front of the shop, through the glass, it looked exactly the same. I locked up at 2:15. Victor squeezed my arm at the door. "Whatever this is," he said, "you didn't deserve it." I drove home and sat in the kitchen until sunrise. I looked at Margaret's photograph on the counter, the one from the summer before she got sick, her standing outside the shop on Merchant Street in a yellow dress, laughing at something I'd said. I couldn't remember what I'd said. I wish I could remember. "I'm handling it," I told her. The board meeting was at 9 in the morning at Tom's office, a second-floor room with tall windows and a long mahogany table that had seen 40 years of Asheville business decisions. Tom was already there when I arrived. Franklin Gear came in at 5 past. Victor and James at 8:50. The minority partners sat along one side with the quiet, watchful patience of people who understood they'd been asked there for a reason. Renata and Derek arrived at 9 sharp. She was composed, professional, dressed in the charcoal blazers she wore to estate viewings. Derek had the portfolio under his arm. He shook hands with Tom, nodded at the partners, didn't look at me for more than a second. Then the last person came through the door. Claire Wooten sat down beside Tom without making a production of it. She set a folder on the table. She'd come straight from the pharmacy and still had her name badge on. Derek's smile shifted a quarter inch. Renata looked at Claire, then at Tom, then at me. "Dad," she said, "what's going on?" "I want to observe a tradition," I said. "My father did this. Before any significant transfer of business matters, he asked everyone in the room to say what they knew about what they were deciding, so you understand what you're inheriting." Derek put the portfolio on the table. "Harold, this is a simple procedural." "Claire," I said. She opened her folder and laid the prescription records in the center of the table. She spoke clearly, without drama, the way she probably talked to patients when the news wasn't good. She explained the correct dosage. She explained the adjusted prescription. She explained the facts from Charlotte, the physician with no record of me as a patient. The cognitive symptoms that metoprolol at 4 times the recommended dose produces in a man my age and weight. Franklin Gear leaned forward. His face had gone very still. I set down the bank statements. 3 transfers from the estate acquisition fund, I said, totaling $145,000. Vendor accounts opened in my name from devices I didn't own, on days I can document I was elsewhere. I turned to Tom. Tom laid the chain of documentation on the table. The Delaware LLC, the Charlotte holding account, the timeline. Renata's hands were flat on the mahogany. She was not looking at the documents. I looked at Derek. "You want the building," I said. 3,200 square feet on Merchant Street, a quarter of a mile from your South Side development site. Anchor commercial property for the mixed-use project you haven't been able to finance. I imagine a property like that, acquired through a controlled asset transfer rather than an open market purchase, would solve several problems at once. Derek's lawyer, who had apparently not been told everything, set down his pen. "This is circumstantial," Derek said. His voice was smooth. "Whatever you think you found." "Then explain Marcus Webb," I said. Silence. "I spoke to Tom's investigator last night," I said. Dr. Tom's investigator last night, I said. Dr. Tom. Webb's malpractice liability is currently serviced through a payment arrangement with a financial entity in Charlotte, the same city where your firm completed the Providence Commons development, the same city where the fax authorizing my prescription adjustment originated. I don't believe in coincidences when money is involved. Neither, I think, does anyone at this table. Derek looked at Renata. Something passed between them that wasn't affection. The door opened. A man I'd asked Tom to invite came in quietly and stood along the wall. Detective Ray Suarez from the Asheville Police Financial Crimes Unit. He'd driven over that morning at Tom's request. Derek stood up. "Sit down," Tom said, and his voice had 40 years of Asheville contracts in it. "Nobody's going anywhere until we've finished." Derek sat down. I looked at my daughter. She was looking at the table. Her hands were still flat on the wood. For a moment, she looked exactly like herself at 16, standing at my father's bench, learning to hold a movement without breathing, and I felt something break open in my chest that I didn't have a name for. "I want to ask you one thing," I said. "Your mother's last good week, you sat with her for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, and she asked you to describe the shop. You described every case from memory, every piece. You knew where everything was because you loved it." Renata's jaw moved. "What happened to that?" I asked. She didn't answer. She put her face in her hands. Derek was charged that afternoon. Wire fraud, financial elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud. Marcus Webb was picked up in Charlotte the same evening and surrendered without incident, his lawyer apparently having advised him that cooperation was his best option. The LLC in Delaware unwound over the following weeks to reveal 3 other investors in Derek's Southside project, none of whom, I suspected, knew exactly how the Merchant Street property was meant to be acquired. Renata was not charged. She sat across from Detective Suarez for 4 hours and answered every question. She came to the shop the following Monday and stood in the doorway in a way she hadn't done since she was a teenager. I was at the bench. I had a 1940s Omega Seamaster on the block. Beautiful movement. Needed a new mainspring. I didn't look up. She said, I kept telling myself it was just temporary, that I'd put everything back when we got stable again, that you'd never actually lose the business. I kept working. Derek's debt was $1.2 million, she said. The project kept hitting walls and we couldn't get financing, and he said this was the only way. I told myself you'd get the business back eventually. I told myself you wouldn't even notice, with the confusion I was having, I said. Yes, she was quiet. Which we made worse. I set the movement down. I looked at her then. I spent 31 years teaching you this, I said. Every piece that came through this door, every client we treated right, every time I could have taken a shortcut and didn't, I thought I was teaching you the business. I thought I was teaching you something else too. She was crying. She didn't wipe her face. Your mother asked me to take care of you, I said. I failed her in a lot of ways after she died. I got lost in my own grief, and I let you carry too much, and I didn't pay enough attention. That's on me. But this, what you let happen. I know, she said. I know you know, I said. She left. I heard the bell above the front door. Then just the clocks. Spring in Asheville comes in increments, slow and then suddenly everywhere. The dogwoods on Merriman Avenue went from bare to blazing in what seemed like a week. I opened the shop windows for the first time in months and let the air in, cool and smelling like wet earth and something blooming I couldn't name. Claire Wooten stopped by on a Thursday afternoon with her daughter, 6 years old, who pressed her nose against the front display case and fogged it with her breath. We had the Patek Philippe back in the case by then, and the English fusee movements on their velvet stands, and everything was where it belonged. Claire's daughter pointed at a small enameled pocket watch with painted flowers on the case. What's that one? She asked. That one belonged to a woman in Vienna in 1887, I said. She carried it every day for 50 years. The girl's eyes went very wide. I looked at Claire. Thank you, I said. She shook her head. You would have figured it out. Maybe, I said. But later. And that would have mattered. She smiled and took her daughter's hand, and they walked back out into the April afternoon. I stood at the front window and watched them go. The street was full of ordinary Tuesday business. A couple choosing between restaurants. A man on the corner checking his phone. A UPS driver making a delivery with the patient efficiency of someone who'd made 1,000 of them. The city kept running like the inside of a good movement, all these small gears turning in relation to each other, each one necessary. My father's bench was in the back. The German vise my grandfather used was still bolted to its corner. The Omega Seamaster I'd been working on was finished, mainspring replaced, case cleaned, running within 3 seconds per day. I'd leave it on the timing block overnight and record the result in the log the way I always had. There was a commission on the bench waiting. A young woman from Biltmore Forest who'd inherited her grandmother's Vacherin Constantine and wanted it restored to working condition. She'd cried when she brought it in, held it in both hands the way you hold something irreplaceable. I'd told her it would take 3 weeks. It would take 2. But I'd learned from my father to never quote less time than you needed, because surprises in this business were almost never the good kind. I went back to the bench. I sat down. I pulled the lamp over the Vacheron, removed the crown, and began the work of learning what something damaged needed to become whole again. The clocks ticked around me. Margaret used to say it was the most peaceful sound she'd ever heard. For the first time in a long time, I thought she might have been right. Victor Okafor came by that evening to return my spare key, and abstained for 2 hours, the way he always did, talking about his father's collection and the state of auction markets, and whether American watchmaking would ever amount to anything serious. His son James had just started learning movement repair, he said, driving over to Knoxville on weekends for instruction. "Send him to me," I said. Victor looked at me over his reading glasses. "I mean it," I said. "I could use someone in the shop who knows how to carry a 1929 Patek Philippe without breathing on it." Victor laughed. The sound filled the workroom and bounced off the stone walls and settled into all the old wood and glass around us. Outside, Merchant Street was getting dark. The streetlights came on one by one, the way they'd been coming on since before either of us was born. I thought about what I would say at the end of all of this if someone asked me what I'd learned. I thought about the clocks, all those different mechanisms built by different hands across different centuries, all of them telling the same thing. Not just the hour. Something else. That the careful work mattered. That what you built with patience and honesty had a weight to it, that shortcuts didn't. That a gear fitted correctly to another gear would keep turning long after the hands that made it were gone. That some losses you don't recover from, and some you do, and the difference between them isn't luck. It's what you decide to do in the 5 days before everything changes. Don't let anyone convince you that confusion is the same as decline. Don't let exhaustion be mistaken for surrender. The most important inventory in any business isn't on the shelves. It's in the person who opens the door every morning and cares what they find there. I am 64 years old. I run Callaway Fine Watches on the corner of Merchant Street. My father started it in 1967. I intend to see it into the next century. What would you have done in my place? Leave me a comment below. And if this story stayed with you the way it stayed with me, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. There's more to come.